The tiny bell on the front desk jingled as I pushed open the door to the quaint, albeit worn, hotel. The place had that distinct musty odour of an establishment that hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint or a decent cleaning since the 1970s. I glanced around, noting the faded wallpaper and the carpet that had seen better days. Despite the dilapidated appearance, it seemed to be a decent place for a quick stopover. I was tired from the long drive and just needed somewhere to crash for the night. "Evening," I said, my voice echoing in the empty lobby. The clerk behind the desk looked up from a book she was reading. She had a kind, though weary face, framed by silver hair. She smiled as she put the book aside. "Good evening. Checking in?" "Yes, just for the night. I called earlier, a room with a queen bed." She shuffled through a cluttered stack of papers before handing me a key. "Room 217, second floor. The elevator's out of order, I'm afraid, so you'll have to use the stairs." I nodded and took the key, noting the old-fashioned design with its large, ornate tag. "No problem. How's the area around here?" "Quiet. A bit too quiet for some, but if you're looking for solitude, it's perfect," she said with a wry smile. I took my luggage and made my way up the creaky stairs. Each step seemed to groan under my weight, the old wood protesting with every movement. By the time I reached the second floor, I felt a layer of grime clinging to my skin. Room 217 was at the end of the hall. I inserted the key into the lock, and the door creaked open with a reluctant groan. Inside, the room was just as expected: dated furniture, an old television, and a bed with a flower-patterned bedspread that had probably seen better days in the 80s. The first thing I did was set up my laptop on the small desk, hoping to catch up on some work before hitting the sack. The room had a heavy silence, interrupted only by the occasional distant thud or creak from the hotel. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Around midnight, I decided it was time to sleep. I shut down my laptop and turned off the light. As I crawled into bed, I noticed that the bedspread felt oddly cold, almost unnaturally so. I shrugged it off as a draft from the window and tried to relax. Sleep didn't come easily. I was restless, tossing and turning under the weight of the bedspread. Every time I started to drift off, I'd be jolted awake by a faint, rhythmic, thudding sound coming from somewhere in the hotel. It was persistent, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to investigate. I got out of bed, my feet cold against the floor, and tiptoed to the door. The thudding seemed to come from the walls themselves, not the hallway. I placed my ear against the wall, but the noise stopped abruptly. I pulled away, puzzled, and returned to bed, determined to ignore it. The noise returned with a vengeance, louder and more insistent. It was coming from directly above me now, a relentless thumping that seemed to reverberate through my bones. I had had enough. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and went out into the hall, hoping to find the source of the noise. The hallway was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the walls. The sound was unmistakable now, a steady, rhythmic pounding that came from the ceiling. I glanced up and saw nothing but the old, stained ceiling tiles. I made my way to the stairwell and climbed up to the third floor, where the noise seemed to be coming from. The hallway here was even darker and more dilapidated than the second floor, with peeling wallpaper and a smell of mildew. The thudding was louder, more insistent, and it seemed to come from one of the rooms. I approached the door of the room directly above mine. It was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of darkness beyond it. The thudding was now accompanied by a faint guttural whispering. My heart raced as I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, Save for an old, decrepit armchair in the corner, the whispering grew louder, more frantic, and the thudding intensified. I noticed something odd about the armchair. It was facing a small, dusty mirror on the wall. As I approached, the mirror seemed to ripple, its surface distorting, as if something were trying to break through from the other side. A sudden cold draft blew through the room, and the whispering turned into a disjointed chant. Shadows danced across the walls, taking on grotesque shapes. My breath came in short gasps as I stumbled back toward the door. The thudding now a deafening roar, I fled the room, rushing down the stairs and back to my own. My hands shook as I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the bed. The thudding had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow even more unsettling. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours until dawn, huddled under the covers, listening for any sign of the noise returning. When morning finally came, I packed my bags with trembling hands and left the hotel as quickly as I could. I didn't mention the incident to the clerk when I checked out. I couldn't bring myself to explain the terror I had experienced. As I drove away, I glanced back at the hotel, its faded facade looking more menacing in the daylight. I never found out what caused the noise, or why the room above mine had such a malevolent presence. Some things are better left unexplored, and that night in room 217 was one I would never forget.